name's Grace Russo. Welcome to my presentation on Frank Sinatra. The birth of Frank Sinatra. Francis Albert Sinatra was born on December 12, 1915, in Hoboken, New Jersey, and weighed 13.5 pounds. Sinatra's birth was extremely traumatic and difficult. Due to his large size, the doctor had to use forceps to get him out of the birth canal. His mother was only 19 when she gave birth to him, and this was typical for the time and was in her apartment for the birth. The use of forceps caused damage to Frank's ear, cheek, neck, and eardrum, and Frank carried these scars with him for the rest of his life. He was an only child of his parents, Antonino Martino Sinatra and Natalie, also known as Dolly Sinatra. They were both Italian-American immigrants. His grandmother was a midwife, and when Frank was still not crying after being born, because he was a stillborn, she grabbed him and ran him under cold water until he began to cry. Frank's mother was Natalina, also known as Dolly Garaventa, who was then married to become a Sinatra. Dolly was a very influential and independent woman who did a lot of work for her community and was a spokesperson for her local Democratic Party. She also worked as a translator during court proceedings for new immigrants who were trying to get citizenship papers. She went on to eventually become the first immigrant woman to hold the position of Democratic ward leader in the state of New Jersey. She was one of the many inspirational women who were a part of the women's rights movement. She was one of the women who chained herself to the court, as we've all heard that story. She was also an amateur singer who would sing at public events. Dolly went to nursing school and became a midwife and provided safe abortions for Catholic Italian women across Hoboken. This was extremely frowned upon, and due to this, she received the nickname Hatpin Dolly, and she was arrested at least 6 times and convicted twice for providing illegal abortions. Dolly was very different than most Italian women of this time. She did not find herself only useful in a home. She was very influential in politics and many other parts of her community, so she was not always around for Frank. Frank's father, Antonino Martino Sinatra, was a firefighter for the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, and he was also a professional boxer, and him and his wife ran a bootleg tavern during Prohibition as well. People described Antonino, which his Italian name was Antonino once he came to America, it was Anthony, as very out of character for a boxer. He was not very high-strung or aggressive and was very relaxed in the ring. He came from a low-class family and spent his young years helping his father, who was a shoemaker. Because of this, Dolly's family was not accepting of their marriage because she was more middle class. Her family was more middle class and he came from the low class. It was also known that Anthony never learned how to read or write, so he was illiterate. He was a bantamweight fighter who was known as Marty O'Brien as his fighting name. He used the name Marty O'Brien because Italian athletes were considered to be less than during this time period, so many Italians used Irish alias names. Frank Sinatra's adolescence. Frank's parents were both very busy individuals, and he had no siblings, so he was often left alone as a child. Most families in his Italian neighborhood had large families with many siblings, so he always felt less than. In an interview, Sinatra stated, I used to wish I had an older brother that could help me when I needed him, and I wish I had a younger sister I could protect. Some feel that the reason his parents never had more children was due to the traumatic experience of Frank's birth. Frank also struggled to make friends during his late childhood and early adolescence stage. It is stated that the scarring from his birth lasted his whole life, and he was bullied because of this. Many kids called him Scarface, and he went on throughout his entire career, even as a famous celebrity, that he would always hide his scars in any way he could. He would hide his facial imperfections with heavy makeup, or sometimes in pictures, you'd see that the shadows are hiding them. I have a picture here of a mugshot that was taken in Bergen County because he couldn't hide it in a mugshot. You could see the scar on his cheek. Frank's parents were not accepting of his aspirations to be a professional singer. His father wanted him to attend Stevens Institute of Technology and have a steady job. Frank dropped out of high school to chase his dreams of being a professional singer, even against his parents' will. His mom eventually got on board when she realized that he was going to be successful. He was also known to have violent reactions in fights. In his adolescence, this also caused him to not have many friends within his peers. The diagnosis that I have chosen for Frank is a personality disorder, specifically borderline personality disorder. The symptomatology of this is usually fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, chronic feelings of emptiness, impulsive, self-destructive behaviors, explosive anger, self-harm, paranoia, disassociation, extreme emotional mood swings, unclear or unstable self-image. The Mayo Clinic definition for all personality disorders is a mental health condition where people have a lifelong pattern of seeing themselves and reacting to others in ways that cause problems. Now we're going to go into the DSM-5 criteria for borderline personality disorder, also known as BPD. A pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image and affects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following criterias. First criteria is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. This does not include suicidal or self-mutilating behaviors. The second criteria is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. The third criteria is identity disturbance. This is a markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. The fourth criteria is impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. Some examples of this are spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, and binge eating. The fifth criteria listed in the DSM-5 is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Criterion 6 is affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. 7 is listed as chronic feelings of emptiness. The 8th criteria is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. This is frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or physical fights. And the last criteria is transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. And this is pulled from the DSM-5. So the first criteria that we're going to look at that Frank shows in his symptomatology is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. And he showed this with gifts and affection after volatile behaviors. So in all of Frank's marriage and interpersonal relationships, he was known to shower people with gifts as a form of manipulation. He would often have inappropriate anger outbursts and then try to mend the relationships he had broken by giving people immense amounts of affection or expensive gifts. Now, this was easy for him because he was a celebrity and had lots of money, so it usually came in the form of gifts. An example of this is when he bought his wife, Mia, $9,000 worth of gifts after exploding on her. And she did not come out and talk about this until after Frank's death. The second symptom that Frank shows is impulsivity in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging. And he showed this with alcohol use and gambling. Frank would be what is known as a problem drinker, and with more information, we could maybe diagnose him as an alcoholic, but he does show alcoholic tendencies. Frank often experienced rage-like reactions and aggressive outbursts after drinking alcohol. His wife, Ava, him and his wife, Ava, were both problem drinkers, and she had multiple abortions because she knew that they couldn't bring kids into the world with how their relationship was. It is known that Frank drank a bottle of Jack every day for many years until his doctors confronted him, in which he switched to wine. Frank also made many comments about how he did not understand how people lived a life abstaining from alcohol, and that if you weren't drinking alcohol, your life was worthless. He was also known to frequently gamble with his friends from the mafia, specifically the Chicago mob boss, Sam. The third criteria that Frank displayed almost in every single one of his relationships and friendships was unstable and intense relationships. And this started beginning his early formative years with those friendships. As discussed before, as a child, Frank was always very lonely and did not have many friends or social interactions. This was the first sign of an interpersonal relationship issue. We do know that he was obviously bullied, so that could be the causation for that. And then once he went on to become an adult in marriages, he was very controlling and had a bad temperament. Frank portrayed these symptoms in his marriages as well. He was married 4 times. He was a very passionate lover, yet also very volatile. Sinatra's marriage to Gardner was the most publicized due to their explosive public fights. This was Ava Gardner. His first marriage, however, was to Nancy Barbado, and they had 3 children. However, they were divorced due to his continual cheating. His next marriage was to Ava Gardner, which was the most publicized because of their volatile fights in public settings. It is known that Ava had multiple abortions because she said her reason for this was because their relationship was too unstable for children and they often fight after alcohol use. He then went on to marry Mia Farrow, who was his third marriage. She was a young actress at the time, and after being married for a while, he insisted that she quit her acting career, but she refused to leave her career, so Frank served her with divorce papers. His final marriage was to Barbara Marks, who, after Frank's death, stated that he would often shower her with gifts and affection 1 second and be screaming and threatening her the next, which, after his death, Mia also said that this had happened in their relationship as well. The next criteria is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats of self-mutilating behavior. So his first suicide attempt is when Frank feared that the new musician Eddie Fisher would cause the end of his career. So he turned on the gas on his stove and put his head in the oven. However, his manager found him before it was too late. And Frank also had one other known suicide attempt, and that was when he planned to shoot himself with a pistol, and his ex-wife, Ava Gardner, tried to wrestle the pistol away from him, and the gun went off, but the bullet luckily didn't hit either of them. Frank also struggled with the symptom of chronic feelings of emptiness. This was seen first in adolescence when he longed for siblings. He was a lonely child who always felt like he was missing something as a kid. He always wished he had siblings since his parents were always busy working. And this went on for the rest of his life. He described himself as a 18-carat depressive manic and had depressive tendencies forever. Frank Sinatra was a celebrity that seemed like he had everything. He could have wanted talent, money, success with women, but he did suffer from extreme depressive episodes. The next symptom of Frank's that we're going to talk about is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. This began with his fighting during adolescence, and we've heard this, as I explained in the social history childhood part, but he did not have friends. Many of the peers who knew him explained that he had outbursts that caused him to not have many friends during his childhood, and this went on even as an adult. He was extremely short-fused. Frank once threw a plate of pasta at the wall in an Italian restaurant because he deemed the pasta too soggy. And another occurrence of his extremely short-fused temper is during a show in Hong Kong, a missed light cue prompted him to destroy his entire dressing room in his hotel suite, breaking priceless antiques during his tantrum. Next, I wanted to discuss some risk factors of borderline personality disorder that we saw in Frank's life, and some of these are brain function. Research shows that people with borderline personality disorder may have differences in their prefrontal cortex. The frontal cortex controls impulses and emotion regulation. Another risk factor is borderline personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder are often co-occurring. And we do know that Frank had trauma starting from the day he was born, and there are people who wonder if a lot of his behavior was because of his traumatic birth. Early trauma from complications at birth. Again, Frank was extremely traumatized from the day he was born, when he was a stillborn, just coming into this world, and ran under cold water, and he came back to life. And he also had those scars that he struggled with from the day he was born for the rest of his life that affected his social aspect and many other things. Being an only child is also a risk factor for developing borderline personality disorder. He felt less than starting from his childhood, and this went on for the rest of his life because he longed for siblings. However, having characteristics of being an only child does put a person at a higher risk. Bullying. It is also noted that bullying is a risk factor for a child developing borderline personality disorder. This is because of the harm to the ego and self-esteem. There's also a cultural aspect to look at with this. Italian Americans with borderline personality disorder are more likely to present with the internalizing symptoms of borderline personality disorder. This is emotional sensitivity, emptiness, and painful interpersonal relationships. Shifts in family structure and life in immigrant families, specifically Italian immigrants, proved to cause more problems, which are gradually having an impact on the expression of borderline personality disorder problems when it comes to emotion regulation and interpersonal functioning. It is also stated in a study that Italian American families, many mental health issues are viewed as problems that should be dealt with inside the family and not seek outside treatment, which is keeping these problems to be continuing growth. And then I just have my resources, so I hope you enjoyed the presentation.